Welcome back to the deep dive. So, you've handed us this stack of sources detailing a really massive, sprawling discussion.
It is.
It's about the current internal conflict on the American political right. Some writers are even calling it a civil war within the Trump coalition. And
Yeah,
this isn't, your standard policy debate. It feels more like an ideological and ethical fracture. It runs deep.
that's exactly right. Our mission today is really to cut through all that noise and just extract the essential criteria that are defining this fight.
Okay.
The source material, it fundamentally revolves around two critical themes.
Wow.
First, you've got this deeply personal ethical clash. It's loyalty versus the pressure to publicly denounce people.
Right.
And second, there are these philosophical definitions that they argue actually distinguish leftism from conservatism in 2024. We need to find where those battle lines are really drawn.
And to understand why it's all happening now, the sources seem to point to one immediate catalyst, the political or maybe actual death of a significant conservative leader they just call Charlie. There's this really striking, almost tragic narrative arc here.
There is.
The immediate reaction, that aspirational one after he was removed, it was hopeful. You killed one Charlie, but now we have a million more Charlies.
But the reality, it proved to be far more cynical. The speakers in our material, they contend that they pretty quickly went from having one Charlie to zero Charlies.
Wow.
This individual, this Charlie, he was described as the, quote, glue that was holding everything together in the movement. His removal was just tragically effective. It created this huge leadership vacuum. And with him, gone.
Everything started coming undone.
Exactly. And that's the context. That's what's fueling this ferocious infighting that we're seeing today.
Okay, so let's unpack this fight. Let's start with that ethical tightrope you mentioned, loyalty versus denouncement. One public figure in the sources, Matt Walsh, he detailed the intense pressure he's under from multiple, often opposing factions to publicly denounce, condemn, disavow people he considers his friends.
And it's not just a political thing.
No, it's a demand for personal submission.
What's fascinating here is how the source material elevates that refusal to denounce from just, a personal stance to a defining moral principle.
Loyalty.
Loyalty itself.
Yeah. The argument they lay out is that loyalty is just essential for any person. It demands personal integrity and a spine. They argue that denouncing a friend just because a mob is yelling.
Whether that mob is on social media or in the establishment.
Right. Either way, it's the definition of unprincipled coercion.
And this really highlights a key distinction about what friendship actually means in this kind of high-pressure environment. It's not just about shared politics.
Right at all.
He emphasizes that a friend is someone you know personally, someone who has had my back and supported me in ways that you might not see. So the integrity lies in refusing to stab you in the back. And crucially, disagreeing on policy is not betrayal. A true friend doesn't demand, total subservience to your latest political take.
Which seems like a line that's getting blurred.
It is. And to stress the severity of this principle, he offers what the source calls an extreme theoretical test. He was asked, would you publicly condemn your brother if he became a serial killer with 40 bodies in his basement?
Okay, that is an incredibly extreme example to choose. I mean, how does that analogy hold up? Because obviously, if you know a murderer, you have a moral obligation to prevent harm.
Exactly. And the speaker clarifies that. He says he would, of course, turn his brother in to face justice for him and his soul.
Ah, okay.
So the analogy isn't about avoiding justice or, protecting a criminal. The refusal is specifically about avoiding public condemnation, public disavowal.
So it's about not participating in the spectacle.
Yes. The point is, refusing to throw a tomato at a family member or a friend in the town square stocks, even if they deserve the legal consequences. It's about maintaining your own personal integrity, not joining the shaming ritual just because the crowd demands it.
So if the friend is already facing the consequences, why would that demand for denouncement still exist?
Because, according to these speakers, demanding public denouncement is really a requirement for a transfer of loyalty.
A transfer of loyalty.
You are forcing that person to be, quote, more loyal to me and my ideas or the mob than you are to your own friends. The source material argues that this impulse isn't just political, it's inherently totalitarian.
Because it's trying to destroy the most basic unit of trust.
Friendship.
Right. It seeks to enforce ideological conformity by breaking that trust.
Well, if the denouncement culture is about enforcing ideological conformity, that provides a really strong bridge to our next segment.
Which is defining the ideological battleground itself. The core conflict, according to the source material, is not fundamentally economic. It's philosophical. It's this wholesale opposition to modern leftism.
And what's really fascinating here is how the sources just cut through all the political labels to define leftism in uh, purely philosophical terms.
How so?
It boils down to one thing: moral relativism. The belief that I have my own truth and the rejection of any objective external truth.
Oh.
The assertion is that if you are a relativist, you are a leftist, full stop. Even if you hold, what seem like conservative positions on guns or immigration.
So it's not about policy, it's about ontology, it's about what is real.
Precisely. The argument is that if you reject objective truth, you are rejecting the very foundations of Western civilization. I mean, if there's no objective truth.
There's no objective justice, no objective basis for human rights, no shared anything, really.
Exactly. And the philosophical outgrowths of this relativism are what the sources describe as the active enemy: opposition to Western civilization, rejection of American identity, and the undermining of foundational institutions like the family and marriage.
And this moves the whole conversation from abstract philosophy to tangible reality. The sources give some really concrete examples.
They do.
The rejection of objective reality, they say, includes the notion that men can be women. And interestingly, the speakers argue that conservatives focusing so clearly on that specific issue actually prove they can win when they're unified and targeting a point of objective reality.
But the deepest fight, the one that really defines the core purpose of their whole movement, the sources contend. It's over the contingent value of life.
The contingent value of life.
Yeah, that's the ultimate test of relativism.
So, meaning that a human life's worth is dependent on outside factors, like whether a mother wants the baby.
Yes. And the speakers use extremely specific, very graphic terminology here. They frame the outcome of this contingent value as the horror of abortion, where children are poisoned, stabbed in the heart, and then disposed of
Or, as they put it, recycled into vaccines.
Right. This fight over the sanctity of life is presented as the central, non-negotiable conflict that defines the conservative mission.
This philosophical line, it finally clarifies the so-called civil war on the right. Economic disagreements, whether to abolish the welfare state or the income tax, they all become secondary.
They do.
If two people disagree on the tax rate, but they both genuinely believe they're fighting to preserve the objective truth of the family, they're still, as the source puts it, using the same alphabet.
The real acid test, they claim, is how you react when objective truth seems to be violated on a massive scale. The sources cite the war in Gaza as revealing true allegiances.
Okay.
The speakers argue that defending the murder of innocents, and they cite tens of thousands of women and children, is fundamentally a leftist argument, because it endorses collective punishment and rejects the sanctity of the individual soul.
Wow, that is a massive claim. So they're using this example to argue that if a person defends this level of massive non-targeted collateral damage without acknowledging it as a horrific moral crime,
they are functionally rejecting the core Western ideal that's derived from, classical Christianity.
Yeah.
The uniqueness and value of every individual's soul.
Now, they do acknowledge that disagreement exists even among conservatives on some of these murky historical events. They cite Hiroshima.
Right. Proponents of the Hiroshima bombing often argue that that massive loss of life was the necessary means to save an even greater number of lives. They rely on a concept called the principle of double effect.
Okay, let's define that really quick, because that's a piece of jargon our listener might need. What is the principle of double effect?
It's an ethical framework. It's designed to justify an action that has both a good intended outcome and a bad foreseen but unintended outcome. So, for instance, the intent is to end a war quickly. That's the good outcome. The foreseen but unintended effect is the mass death of civilians, the bad outcome. Critically, the bad effect must not be the means of achieving the good effect.
So the goal in the Hiroshima example was victory in saving millions of soldiers, not specifically killing Japanese civilians.
Precisely.
Okay.
But the speakers do concede that this principle runs very, very close to the dangerous idea that the ends justify the means. The difference, according to the sources, it ultimately comes down to intent and spiritual orientation.
Cherishing human life versus
thinking, for example, that dead kids are funny, which the speakers claim is an orientation that makes you a leftist regardless of your political label.
That brings us to the observable world. The sources contend that a lot of pundits are insulated, right? They're living in bubbles, and they're ignoring the empirical fact that everything in our day-to-day lives has gotten worse over the years.
Everything, from food quality and clothing durability to infrastructure. The philosophical rot is manifesting as physical decay.
And they use the decline of restaurant food quality as a specific, measurable example.
That's interesting.
Yeah, why does the food at large chain restaurants, the ones that cater to the middle class, why does it feel so much worse than it did, say, 15 or 20 years ago? The sources point to three clear mechanisms.
Okay, lay them out for us.
First, corporate influence. Mid-tier American staples like, an Applebee's or a Chili's, they're being systematically bought up by private equity firms who fundamentally don't care about the product.
Their goal is just maximizing profit extraction through cost cutting, not quality.
Exactly, which means replacing expensive fresh ingredients with cheap, mass-produced frozen items.
Which leads to the third point, homogenization. Restaurants don't make fresh food from scratch anymore. They rely almost exclusively on a couple of giant food distributors like Cisco.
So you're getting the same prepackaged, frozen, assembly line prepared food no matter which state or chain you're in.
The food all tastes the same because it is literally coming off the same truck using the same centralized recipes.
And what about the workforce?
That's the second mechanism they point to. The sources note that the staff is changing. It's less often high school or college kids looking for a summer job,
Right.
and more often adults who are struggling with difficult lives and consequently don't really care that much about the product or the customer experience.
So when the corporate ethos shifts from service to extraction, the staff's motivation just follows suit.
It does. And this decay is missed by the people in power because they are insulated. They live either in very wealthy enclaves where everything is pristine, or they focus only on deeply rural or low-income areas.
Missing the experience of the overwhelming majority of Americans in the middle who frequent places like Walmart, the DMV, and these mid-tier chain restaurants.
That visibility is key.
Yeah.
And it leads to the most profound and frankly controversial observable change discussed in the sources, the rapid demographic shift.
Right.
The speakers note that places like Walmart and rest stops look a lot different now, meaning they observe fewer white people.
And this prompted a discussion within the source material about national identity. The speakers challenged the accepted narrative that it's inherently wrong to discuss or even note the decline of the white population in America.
Yeah, they assert that the white people of European descent who formed the nation of America are the country's natives. They frame this as reclaiming a title that is essential for preserving the national identity they're fighting for.
This demographic and philosophical anxiety, it culminates in a very specific and terrifying cautionary tale.
It does. The Canadian Medical Assistance in Dying Program, or MAID.
Which the speakers describe as one of the most evil things happening in the world.
Yeah.
So why is this program, which started as euthanasia for the terminally ill, why is it such a touchstone for their fear?
Because it represents the final logical outcome of that contingent value of life. It expanded so rapidly from the terminally ill to include those who can't pay your rent. It's extending potentially to children, and it involves the state's potential use of organs from the deceased. The speakers view this as a clear precursor of totalitarian control that began historically with Hitler's euthanasia programs, the state determining that certain lives are not worth living.
This, then, represents the end of the slippery slope fallacy. It's no longer a hypothetical slope. We're at the bottom.
We are.
Yeah.
Once the state allows the medical establishment to use death, murder, as a form of medical treatment, you haven't just destroyed the Hippocratic Oath, you've destroyed the whole thing, philosophically.
So how can this chaotic intra-right conflict be resolved or even survived? The sources suggest the chaos itself is beneficial.
It forces clarity.
It forces clarity. Individuals must now define clearly what they're trying to conserve.
It's like you have to make an actual inventory. If your list aligns with another person's list, objective truth, the family, national identity, then your disagreements are merely about how to achieve those shared goals.
But if your lists don't align,
Then you gain the painful but necessary clarity that you are not on the same side at all.
and there's an upside to the disruption of social media platforms like X in this process. While it's chaotic, it has stripped away the mystique of the puba class.
Yeah, the legacy politicians, the media figures, the tenured academics, they're revealed to be not impressive and to have nothing to say.
And that allows what the sources describe as morsels of incredible wisdom to filter up from random Twitter accounts. The intellectual center of gravity is shifting.
That shift, though, it comes at a psychological cost. The sources really emphasize the relentless intensity of the assault experienced by public figures operating in this environment.
The personal attacks, the constant demands, the betrayal by friends, it sounds exhausting.
It is.
So we end with the final and most personal question posed by the speakers. How do you avoid becoming a foaming at the mouth hater under such relentless 247 pressure?
And the answer is rooted entirely in self-discipline and intentional structure. The hosts stress that when you are stressed and frustrated by the chaos, your spiritual life often just dries up, which only snowballs the frustration. The core response, they argue, has to be a rich prayer life.
But the more practical advice for you, the listener, focuses specifically on self-control. One speaker cited the terrible common habit of checking your phone or X first thing in the morning.
Which just poisons the start of the day.
Exactly. He described one instance where the first thing he read was a lie about himself. Matt Walsh is a coward.
And that immediate absorption of manufactured chaos, before your mind or your soul has had a chance to orient itself toward reality and purpose, that's what defeats you before the day even begins. To survive this ideological war, the final provocative takeaway from these sources is simple.
Reorient yourself toward faith and self-discipline.
That's it. The internal struggle for self-control is the most important battle you can fight to withstand the external chaos.